Smile 2 is a horror sequel about a curse causing a young pop star to see a smiling demon everywhere she goes. Like the first movie, it has a lot of depth, though it can be a little bit cheesy at times. Let's talk about it. In this movie, we follow Skye Riley, played by Naomi Scott. She's a big superstar going on a comeback tour after a long career hiatus. While dealing with several struggles, including her traumas and the pitfalls of stardom, she's given a supernatural curse where she sees a smiling entity everywhere she goes. This starts to bend her sense of reality, leaving her to wonder what's real and what's not, all while trying to save her sinking music career. Big spoiler warning for the first movie because I need to peel back the layers of that movie to give the much needed context for this one, and I never reviewed it because it came out before my time on YouTube, but you can chapter skip this part if you just want to hear about Smile 2. I think I stand with a lot of people when I say that when the trailer and posters for the first movie dropped, I thought it looked kind of bad. It just looked like another gimmicky, generic, lowbrow horror movie. I had no expectations of it actually being good. That said, it's actually not half bad. It definitely has some cheesy moments in it. I'm not gonna call it perfect, but I gotta say that I was pleasantly surprised by it. I enjoyed it so much because of the amount of depth it had. The movie is an allegory for the impacts of repressed trauma. It's about how neglecting your mental health and choosing to bury your emotions away will only make things worse when you're inevitably reminded of your traumatic experiences. The main character, Rose, never worked through the experience of losing her mother right in front of her at such a young age. She's reminded of her childhood experience when a patient casually mentions losing her grandfather as a kid. Laura passes the smile curse to Rose in the same scene where she reminds her of her similar traumatic experience, because the unresolved trauma is the curse. The smile curse looming over her is just a metaphor for her traumas haunting her. She continuously sees people in her life smiling as a parallel to how that person reminded her of the experience she never went through the steps of resolving emotionally. On the surface, this all plays out like a traditional horror thriller, but when you look closer, every form the curse takes represents someone who is digging up her repressed trauma. She even acknowledges that she's allowed her mother's death to affect her so badly that she has since then been reluctant to allow other people to get close to her. She expresses this to her ex Joel, saying that when she met him and felt the emotional walls start to come down around her, it scared her. She didn't know how to handle someone new being so close to her because she never truly allowed anyone to help her get over her fear of emotional attachment. This conversation would be extremely out of place if the curse didn't represent how her mother's death has ruled her life the same way that this evil smiling entity has. This was her way of beating the curse. Of course, they then botched the ending by opting for a traditional horror ending. She ends up not shaking the curse despite acknowledging her shortcomings, and it kills her. I hated this ending because not only does it not make any sense since she displayed the necessary personal growth, but it feels like a bad insinuation that you can't work through unresolved trauma. Anyway, the point of that recap was to clarify that trauma is the core subject of that film, and going into this one, I was hoping that they would do something a little bit different with the curse's symbolism. It's a bit murky in this one. The smile curse seems to represent more than just trauma. It seems like a catch-all for the things ailing Skye, things like guilt, stress, and pressure. All of these things could be considered traumatizing to Skye, but it just seems like a bit of a stretch to call everything that happens to her traumatic. Nevertheless, this was an interesting direction to take with the sequel because not only is a traumatic experience haunting Skye, but her stress is further induced by the difficulties of fame. She's attempting to make a career comeback and feels that she owes it to her fans to give them what they want, in addition to providing for the people in her life who are relying on her success. There's a lot riding on her career, but the constant reminders of her traumatic experience and her discomfort with the public's idolization of her make it really hard for her to succeed. So the smile curse more or less represents her overall career struggles. Pretty much anytime something bad happens, we later see that experience smiling back at her. It's a strong statement on how personal struggles are very heavy in the limelight because everything you're struggling with is being put on a stage for the entire world to see and judge you for. The nature of the smiling demon doesn't feel as consistent as it was in the first movie though. For example, this little girl. Normally the smiling demon represents the main character's stress, but here it even seemed to have confused her, so it's a little bit confusing. But this movie takes the first one's premise and puts it on a much bigger stage. It takes the same terror, struggles, and stigma and turns the volume all the way up by putting it all on a celebrity. The stakes feel much bigger because of that, so you can't help but feel incredible concern for the fact that Skye losing her mind could have a large impact on her image. With such big stakes, the movie definitely could have shown us more of the public's reactions to her bad episodes. We do see some, but for a smile story about someone allegedly so big, we definitely could have seen more of the repercussions, but we're mostly blind to them. There's really just one scene that comes to mind that really makes you put your hands over your face in secondhand embarrassment, but it's one that rivals the humiliation of the first movie's birthday party scene. This movie also rivals the first one's jump scare power. There are some that you kind of see coming, but then there are some that really sneak up on you. It gets to the point where pretty much anytime there is a long take with no music and little noise, you're just left there thinking, come on, okay, where is it? Let's get it over with. There are enough good jump scares that when you're left in anticipation like that, you do feel scared. If that's what you want out of a horror movie, to actually feel scared, this one delivers. I'm usually not a big fan of horror movies that rely on heavy jump scares for their primary source of horror stimulation. That said, this movie had a lot of other stuff going on, and the jump scares were more of a side dish than an entree. Another horror side dish included here that was more of a taste test in the first movie is the gore. There is notably a lot more blood and gore in this movie than the first. There were only like 2 scenes in the first movie that I recall being pretty graphic, but this one has quite a lot. Between the gore and the jump scares, this feels like a crowd-pleasing horror film. That said, this movie does occasionally have some pretty cringy characters, and for me personally, that's its biggest shortcoming. There are moments where characters are behaving so over the top and unhinged that it's actually just comical. The movie is silly in some ways. Sometimes it doesn't work, but sometimes it does. There are some silly lines of dialogue that fit really well into the script. It was really just when it relied on clueless, maniacal character behavior to be funny that it actually just came off as cringy. Definitely not all of them were cringy though. I really gotta give it to Naomi Scott. She totally nailed this role. She flexes some serious range in this movie. Sometimes she has to be somber and commands sympathy. Other times she's very disturbed and panicky. And sometimes her character is just downright awful. That's usually the result of her reaction to the curse and her hallucinations, but she is no saint. I like that the movie doesn't shy away from making her a bit of a tyrant. She's not completely over the top, like a total rich asshole. So we're still able to feel something for her, but she's also bad enough that when horrible things happen to her, we're not completely upset. Also, if you're not aware, Naomi Scott did actually do the vocals for her character's music. They actually recorded a whole EP for this movie, and it's pretty solid to be honest. There's a whole lot of good things about this movie. For me personally, the thing that hinders it the most is its cheesy characters, and I think that's where it will lose a lot of people. That and the ending. No spoilers, but the trope that is the ending is one that I absolutely hate. It's a mostly really cool and wild ending, but then at the very last moment, it just makes you go, ow, come on, dude. That said, I think the ending in this movie was much more fitting than the first one. As mentioned earlier, they absolutely botched the ending in that one, but here I think it makes a lot more sense for this story and this character. So with all things considered, I would call it a pretty decent movie. It has just enough for me to earn the apt smiley face rating. If you're a traditional horror film fan and you want an actually scary movie that has a bit of depth to it, you'll probably like this one. But if you prefer your horror films to be a little bit more realistic, or if cheesy characters can ruin a movie for you, then you might not like this one. Thank you for watching this review. If it brought you any value at all, please give it a like. It really does help the channel grow. I'll see you later this week with my review of We Live in Time.